Good evening, night wanderers, and welcome to Nachtmare Witness. Here, true and forgotten stories step out of the shadows, told in a calm voice to help you relax, clear your mind, and slowly drift into sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, tell me where you are listening from. Leave your city or country in the comments below. It is always wonderful to see how far these stories travel through the night. You may hear a few short ads near the beginning of the video. After that, there will be no more interruptions, only the quiet darkness, the gentle sound of my voice, and the strange stories waiting ahead. So, lower the lights, get comfortable, and allow the world around you to slowly disappear. And if you enjoy peaceful nights filled with true fear, mystery, and unexplained events, please like the video, subscribe to Nachtmare Witness, and turn on notifications. Now close your eyes, take a slow breath, and listen carefully. Tonight, the darkness has something to tell you. This happened sometime in the early to mid-2000s, back when most people did not carry GPS navigation in their pockets. Smartphones were not yet something everyone had, and getting somewhere unfamiliar usually meant printing directions from MapQuest, studying a paper map, or hoping your memory was good enough to recognize the right highway exits. I was young, inexperienced, and far more confident about driving somewhere unfamiliar than I had any right to be. It was Valentine's night, and my girlfriend and I had gone to medieval times in North Jersey for dinner and the show. The evening itself had been fun. We had eaten, watched the nights, enjoyed the whole dramatic experience, and were supposed to end the night by returning to our hotel. That should have been the simple part. I had printed out MapQuest directions and had a general idea of where we needed to go. At the time, that felt like enough. The directions probably included a series of road names, turns, and estimated distances, but once you missed one step, the entire page could become almost useless. MapQuest did not calmly tell you to turn around. It did not recalculate. It did not say, take the next exit and continue for 2 miles. If you missed a turn, you had to recognize the mistake yourself, find somewhere safe to stop, and somehow work out how to return to the correct route. At night, on unfamiliar roads, that was much harder than it sounds. My girlfriend and I left medieval times expecting to reach the hotel without much trouble. I probably glanced at the printed directions before pulling away and thought I understood the route. For a while, everything seemed fine. Then I made a wrong turn. I may not have realized it immediately. Highways in North Jersey can become confusing even when you know where you are going. Roads divide, lanes disappear, exits arrive quickly, and signs may list several destinations at once. For a young driver unfamiliar with the area, it was easy to follow the wrong road while still believing it might lead in the right general direction. I kept driving. The surroundings became less familiar. The road signs did not match the names on my printed directions. I tried to convince myself that perhaps we were taking a slightly different route and would soon recognize something. Instead, I made another wrong turn. Then, possibly another. Eventually, I realized I had no idea where we were. We had somehow ended up in or around New York City. I cannot say exactly where because I did not know then, and I still do not know now. We may have crossed into one of the boroughs or entered a confusing section of highway near the city. Everything was dark, unfamiliar, and moving too quickly for me to study the signs properly. I was trying to drive safely while also reading road names, remembering the MapQuest directions, and pretending to my girlfriend that I had not completely lost control of the situation. There is a particular kind of stress that comes from being lost while another person is depending on you. If I had been alone, I could have admitted I had no idea where I was and pulled over somewhere to think. With my girlfriend beside me on Valentine's night, I wanted to seem capable. I did not want our fun evening to turn into an argument or a story about how I got us stranded somewhere near New York. So I kept going, hoping the next sign would solve everything. Then we passed through a toll booth. That created another problem. I did not have much cash. In those days, you could not always assume every toll accepted a card or that there would be an easy way to pay electronically. Cash was often necessary, and I either had just enough to get through that booth or realized I would not have enough for the next one. At the same time, the car was low on fuel. The fuel gauge was close enough to empty that I could no longer ignore it. Being lost was one problem. Being lost with almost no gas and no cash for another toll was much worse. I took the first exit I could find. I was not choosing the exit because I recognized the area. I simply needed to get off the highway and find a gas station. The exit led us into a darker, quieter area underneath or near the highway. The bright traffic and overhead signs disappeared behind us. We entered streets that felt almost empty. It was around 10 o'clock at night. The businesses we passed were closed or difficult to identify in the dark. I watched for the familiar glow of a gas station sign. Eventually, I found one underneath the highway. At first, seeing it felt like a solution. There were pumps. There was a small office or shop. There was an ATM. I thought we could buy fuel, withdraw some cash, and then ask someone for directions back toward the hotel. Once I drove into the parking lot, however, it became clear that the gas station was not open. The pumps were shut off. The outside lights were not working or had been turned off for the night. The parking area was almost completely dark. The shop's main office appeared closed. No employees were standing behind the counter. There were no customers filling their tanks. The place looked abandoned. The only visible light came from somewhere inside the building. A dim lamp was on in a back room that I could not see directly. The weak glow reached part of the office, just enough for me to make out shapes through the front window. It was not the welcoming light of an open business. It looked more like someone had left a single lamp burning after closing. I should probably have driven away immediately. The pumps were not working, and there was no obvious employee available to help. But the ATM appeared to be accessible. I needed cash for the tolls, and I hoped that once I had money, I could continue searching for an open station. My girlfriend remained in the car. I got out and walked toward the ATM. The parking lot was quiet. Above us, vehicles may have been moving along the highway, but the sound was distant or muffled by the concrete structure. The station itself felt separated from the rest of the city. The darkness made it difficult to see beyond the small amount of light coming from the building. There could have been people nearby without me noticing. At that point, I was thinking mainly about the ATM and the fuel gauge. I inserted my card. The screen responded normally at first. I entered my PIN. I selected the amount I wanted to withdraw. Then the machine stopped responding. It did not immediately reject the transaction or return my card. The screen seemed frozen. I waited. Nothing happened. The ATM looked as though it might time out eventually, but it gave me no clear information. I pressed a button. Still nothing. I may have tried canceling the transaction. The system remained unresponsive. Standing at a frozen ATM is frustrating under normal circumstances. Standing at one outside a closed gas station in a dark, unfamiliar area late at night feels very different. I was exposed. My bank card was inside the machine. I had already entered my PIN. The screen showed that I was trying to withdraw cash. Anyone nearby could see exactly what I was doing. A minute passed. Then perhaps another. I became increasingly aware of how long I had been standing there. My girlfriend was still waiting in the car. She could see me at the machine, but she probably could not understand why I had not returned. I turned around to explain. I looked back toward the car and gestured or called out that the ATM was taking a long time. Perhaps I told her it had frozen and I was waiting for the transaction to cancel. She remained in the passenger seat. The car was only a short distance away, which gave me some comfort. Then I turned back toward the ATM. That was when I saw the man. He was standing inside the office behind the window. I had not seen him approach. I had not heard a door open. One moment, the office had appeared empty, except for the dim light from the back room. The next, a man was standing in the darkness, staring directly at me. He was not behind the counter behaving like an employee who had come to ask what I needed. He was simply there. His face was partly visible through the window. The room behind him was dark. He did not smile. He did not wave. He did not ask whether the ATM was working. He only stared. The sudden appearance of another person made the entire situation feel wrong. Until that moment, I had assumed the station was empty. Now I understood someone had been inside the building the entire time. He may have been watching me from the darker back room before stepping into view. I had no idea who he was. He could have been the owner, an employee closing for the night, a security guard, or someone who had no legitimate reason to be there. The office door was closed. The lights remained off. Nothing about his presence explained itself. I responded in the most awkward way possible. I gave him a small, nerdy wave. It was the kind of wave you make when you unexpectedly make eye contact with a stranger and do not know what else to do. The gesture was supposed to communicate that I was harmless. I was only using the ATM. I was not trying to break into the station or cause trouble. He did not wave back. His expression did not change. He continued staring at me. The longer he remained silent, the more nervous I became. I started explaining myself through the glass. I told him I was only using the ATM. I said the machine had stopped responding. I assured him that I would be leaving as soon as the transaction finished or canceled. I may have pointed toward the screen as proof. He gave no sign that he understood. We stared at each other for another moment. He was inside a dark room at a closed gas station at 10 o'clock at night. I was outside with my bank card trapped in an ATM, low on gas, lost, and without enough cash for another toll. My girlfriend was sitting in the car watching the interaction. Nothing had happened that was clearly dangerous, but every part of the scene felt increasingly uncomfortable. I could not tell whether the man was angry, confused, or simply waiting. His silence allowed my imagination to fill in the missing information. Maybe he thought I was trying to steal from the machine. Perhaps he wanted me to leave. Maybe he was deciding whether to come outside. I did not know whether the office door was unlocked or whether someone else was inside with him. I also did not know what neighborhood we were in or whether anyone would hear us if something happened. Then he finally spoke. He said, "I don't speak Spanish." The sentence made no sense to me. I had been speaking English. As far as I knew, I had not said anything in Spanish. There was nothing about the conversation that should have led him to respond that way. Perhaps he had not heard me clearly through the glass and assumed I was speaking another language. Maybe my nervous explanation sounded confused or muffled. He could have been joking. He might have been intoxicated, tired, or simply trying to tell me he did not understand. There may have been a perfectly ordinary explanation. But in that moment, the strange statement broke whatever courage I had left. Something about hearing I don't speak Spanish after I had spoken to him in English made the entire interaction feel disconnected from normal reality. It was as though we were not participating in the same conversation. I had been explaining that I was using the ATM. He responded to something I had not said. My mind immediately decided that staying was no longer worth it. The ATM transaction had not completed. I do not remember whether the machine had returned my card by then, or whether I managed to retrieve it quickly before leaving. What I do know is that no cash came out. I abandoned the attempt I moved away from the machine and returned to the car as quickly as possible. I did not continue trying to explain myself. I did not ask the man for directions. I did not wait to see whether he would come outside. I got into the driver's seat and left. The man remained behind the window, or at least I did not see him follow us. The dark gas station disappeared behind us as I drove back toward the road. I still needed fuel. I still needed cash. We were still lost. But those problems suddenly felt less important than putting distance between us and that station. My girlfriend may have asked what the man said. When I repeated the sentence, it probably sounded as strange to her as it had to me. I don't speak Spanish. That was it. No threat, no demand, no explanation. Only that sentence from a man who had appeared inside a dark office and watched me struggle with an ATM. As we drove away, I kept checking the mirrors. I expected headlights to appear behind us. Part of me imagined the man leaving the office, getting into another vehicle, and following us. Nothing like that happened. The road remained quiet. We continued searching for somewhere open. Eventually, we managed to find our way back toward the hotel. I do not remember exactly how we solved the navigation problem. We may have found a busier road, recognized a sign, or stopped at another business where someone could give directions. Perhaps the MapQuest instructions became useful again once I found a familiar highway. Whatever happened, we eventually reached the hotel. The rest of Valentine's night was actually good. Once we were safely inside, the entire event began feeling more absurd than dangerous. We had dinner at medieval times, became hopelessly lost, wandered toward New York City, nearly ran out of gas, stopped at a dead gas station beneath a highway, and encountered a silent man who responded to English by announcing that he did not speak Spanish. It sounded like the kind of story we would laugh about later. And we did. But the memory has always remained unsettling. Nothing clearly criminal happened. The man never threatened me. He did not come outside. He did not touch the ATM or approach the car. For all I know, he was an employee completing paperwork in the back room after the station closed. Maybe he saw a stranger standing at the ATM and came forward to make sure I was not damaging it. His stare may have looked hostile, only because the lighting was poor. The glass may have made it impossible for him to hear me clearly. Perhaps he genuinely believed I was speaking Spanish. That is probably the most ordinary explanation. But fear is created by more than facts. It comes from the combination of location, timing, uncertainty, and vulnerability. I was young. I was lost. The car was low on fuel. I had almost no cash. My girlfriend was depending on me to get us safely to the hotel. The gas station was closed and dark. The ATM had frozen after I entered my PIN. Then a man appeared without warning and stared from behind a window. Even if he was completely harmless, I had no way to know that. My mind treated every unknown detail as a possible threat. The dark office could have contained other people. The ATM could have been broken or tampered with. The station might have been closed for a reason. The man could have been angry that I was on the property. The lack of working pumps meant we had no real reason to stay once the transaction failed. Leaving was the safest choice. The experience also reminded me how different traveling felt before smartphones. Today, if someone takes a wrong turn, their phone immediately offers a new route. They can see the name of the neighborhood, locate nearby gas stations, read business hours, check reviews, and pay many tolls electronically. They can send their live location to another person. If they feel unsafe, they can call for help while giving an exact address. We had none of that. My MapQuest paper could only describe one planned route. Once I left it, I was navigating through instinct and road signs. I could not search for the nearest open gas station. I could not check whether the dark station was listed as closed. I could not tell my family exactly where we were. I did not know which direction led away from the city or back toward the hotel. That lack of information made the darkness feel larger. We were not truly isolated in the wilderness. We were probably surrounded by roads, buildings, and thousands of people. But because I did not know the area, it felt like we had entered a blank space on the map. The highway above us carried people somewhere. The gas station stood beneath it in darkness. The contrast was strange. Cars were moving overhead, while we seemed completely alone below. I have sometimes wondered whether the ATM was even supposed to be operating after the station closed. Maybe it had malfunctioned because the business had shut down some of its systems. Perhaps the man had come out because he heard the machine or saw someone using it. If he worked there, he may have expected me to understand that the station was closed. From his perspective, I might have been the strange one. A young man arrived late at night, walked up to a dark building, struggled with an ATM, turned around to talk to someone in a car, then began speaking through the window. He may have been just as suspicious of me as I was of him. The language misunderstanding could have resulted from the glass. I may have spoken too quickly. Fear can make a person's voice higher and words less clear. He could have caught only a few sounds and assumed I was speaking Spanish. If English was not his first language, he may have had difficulty understanding my explanation. Saying I don't speak Spanish might have been his own awkward attempt to end the confusion. That explanation makes sense now. At the time, it felt almost supernatural. Not because I thought the man was a ghost, but because the response did not connect to anything I believed was happening. Strange conversations can feel more frightening than direct hostility. If he had said the station is closed, I would have apologized and left. If he had said the ATM is broken, I would have thanked him. If he had told me to get off the property, I would have understood. Instead, he gave an answer to a different question in a different language. That created the feeling that normal communication had failed. Once people cannot understand one another, the situation becomes unpredictable. I no longer knew what he believed I was doing. He did not know what I was trying to explain. The glass separated us physically, but the misunderstanding created another barrier. There is humor in the story now. I can admit that my response was not especially brave. I did not calmly solve the situation. I did not investigate. The strange sentence caused me to fail whatever courage I had left, and I ran. That is probably why the story works so well when I tell it. The line is unexpected. After all the build-up, the man does not threaten me. He says he does not speak Spanish. Then I leave in terror. But the humor exists because nothing bad happened. Had the man followed us, attacked me, or stolen my card, the story would feel very different. Because we found the hotel and enjoyed the rest of the night, the gas station became a strange detour rather than a disaster. Still, I am glad I trusted the discomfort. People sometimes remain in unsafe feeling situations because they are afraid of appearing rude. I could have stayed and continued explaining. I might have waited several more minutes for the ATM. I could have knocked on the office door and asked for help. Perhaps that would have been completely fine. But there was no reason to take the risk. The transaction had failed. The station was closed. I did not know the man. Leaving cost me nothing except the possibility of withdrawing cash at that machine. The event also taught me to prepare better. A printed route was useful, but I should have carried a proper map. I should have made sure the car had enough fuel before leaving medieval times. I should have kept cash for tolls. Those small preparations could have prevented the entire situation. Instead, one mistake created another. I missed a turn. Then I became lost. Because I was lost, I passed through an unexpected toll. Because of the toll, I needed cash. Because I was low on fuel, I took the first exit. Because I took the first exit, I found the dark gas station. Because I needed the ATM, I got out of the car. A chain of ordinary mistakes led to the strange encounter. That is how many frightening experiences happen. No single choice seems terrible by itself. Together, they place you somewhere you never intended to be. I still sometimes picture the man's face behind the window. The dim lamp from the back room did not fully illuminate him. Most of the office remained dark. He seemed almost to appear from the darkness rather than walk into it. I know that is only how it looked. He must have been standing somewhere out of sight and stepped forward. But because I did not see the movement, my memory jumps from an empty room to a man staring at me. That sudden change is what made me freeze. The window also changed the way his face looked. Glass reflects light. At night, it can hide expressions and make someone's eyes appear darker. He may not have been glaring as aggressively as I thought. Perhaps he was squinting to see me. Maybe he was confused. My fear interpreted his neutral expression as a threat. That is possible. But even if the danger existed only in my perception, the fear was real. My body reacted before I had time to analyze. I became aware of my distance from the car. I thought about my girlfriend sitting alone. I realized the office door could open. I wanted to leave before the situation changed. When he spoke, the nervous tension became too much. I did not need proof that he was dangerous. I only needed to recognize that staying served no purpose. We eventually reached the hotel, and the night recovered. That part matters. A frightening detour did not ruin everything. We were safe. The car did not run out of fuel before we found help. We did not become trapped by another toll. The ATM did not take money from my account. The man did not follow us. Our Valentine's night ended much better than it might have. Years later, the story represents a very specific time. It belongs to the era of printed directions, cash tolls, and driving into uncertainty without a phone quietly guiding you back. Today, getting lost is often a minor inconvenience. Then, it could quickly become a genuine problem. One wrong turn might carry you miles away before you realized it. A road could place you on a bridge, through a tunnel, or at a toll booth with no easy way to turn around. You might cross into another state or city accidentally. Finding your hotel again required patience, luck, and sometimes help from strangers. That night, I found the wrong stranger in the wrong-looking place. He may have been harmless. He may even have thought I was the suspicious person. I will never know. I only know how it felt to stand at that ATM while the machine stopped responding. I remember turning toward my girlfriend to explain the delay. Then I turned back and found a man watching me from inside the dark office. I waved. He stared. I explained that I was only trying to withdraw money. He continued staring. Then he said, "I don't speak Spanish." That was enough for me. I abandoned the transaction, returned to the car, and left as quickly as I could. The machine never gave me any cash. The station never gave us fuel. The man never explained who he was. But we eventually found the hotel, and the rest of the night was great. The experience was not the most dangerous thing that could have happened to us. It may not have been dangerous at all. But whenever I remember that Valentine's night, I still see the dark gas station beneath the highway and the silent figure behind the glass, answering a question I never asked. When I was younger, my mother, my brother, and I went to Florida with my stepfather. At the time, I did not fully understand how bad the situation would become. I only knew that we were leaving one place and going somewhere new with an adult who was supposed to help take care of us. Instead, we ended up in a rundown trailer park where drugs, neglect, violence, and fear seemed to be part of daily life. The trailer itself was in terrible condition. There were roaches everywhere. They moved through the kitchen, appeared around food, and came out of places that should have been clean. No matter how careful we were, it felt impossible to keep them away. There were also rats. They were not small mice that disappeared when someone entered the room. These rats were huge, or at least they looked huge to me at the time. I remember their tails looking unbelievably long, perhaps close to 3 feet in my frightened childhood memory. They got into our food. They ate our bread and anything else they could reach. Food was already important because there was not always enough of it. Watching rats chew through what we had made the whole place feel even more unsafe. The trailer did not feel like a home. A home is supposed to be the place where a child can sleep, eat, and relax without expecting something bad to happen. This place felt temporary, dirty, and dangerous. There were insects in the walls, rats near the food, and people around us who often seemed involved with drugs or other trouble. Even before the worst things began, there was already a feeling that something was wrong. My stepfather was one of the main reasons. I call him evil because of what I saw him do to my family and our animals. He was not only angry sometimes, he was controlling, violent, and cruel. One day, my mother accused him of cheating on her. I do not know every detail of their relationship or what evidence she had. I only remember the argument becoming serious very quickly. He became furious. During the fight, he put his hands around my mother's neck and began choking her. That is one of the moments that made me understand we were not safe with him. Arguments between adults can be loud and frightening for children, but this was no longer only an argument. He was physically attacking her. He had his hands on her throat. For a child watching, there is a terrible helplessness in seeing a parent being hurt by someone stronger. My mother fought back. She managed to get him off her. After she escaped his grip, he ran out. I do not know whether he was afraid the police would come, whether he suddenly understood what he had done, or whether he simply wanted to avoid facing the consequences. I only know that he left after choking her. The fear did not leave with him. Once someone has shown that level of violence, you do not feel safe just because they walk out of the room. You know they can return. You know the next argument could become even worse. The whole family begins adjusting around that person's anger. You watch their face. You listen to their voice. You try to guess whether they are calm or whether something small will make them explode. Children should not have to learn those skills, but many do. Around this time, another event made everything more unstable. My older brother wanted a Sprite, and my mother drove out to get one. While she was driving, she was stopped and arrested because the registration sticker or some similar sticker on the vehicle was not up to date. I was young, so I did not fully understand the legal details. To me, it seemed ridiculous that something involving a sticker on a car could suddenly take my mother away from us. One moment she was there, then she was gone. That left my brother, me, my stepfather, and our 3 dogs in the trailer. The dogs were named King, Nika, and Prince. They were part of our family. Children often feel especially close to animals when the adults around them are unpredictable. Dogs do not judge you, threaten you, or demand explanations. They stay close, give affection, and make a frightening place feel slightly less lonely. King, Nika, and Prince depended completely on us. They needed food, water, shelter, and protection. My stepfather should have provided those things while my mother was gone. Instead, he became even more abusive. He began mistreating my brother. He ignored him. He withheld food. He treated him as though his basic needs did not matter. Starving a child is not discipline. Ignoring a child who depends on you is not teaching responsibility. It is abuse. My brother was old enough to understand that the situation was dangerous, but he was still young and trapped in a place where an adult controlled the food, transportation, and home. My stepfather also abused our dogs. I cannot remember every single thing he did, and I do not want to invent details that I did not personally see. What I do remember is that he neglected them and treated them cruelly. The dogs were not being properly fed or cared for. They were frightened. They were living in the same dirty, unstable environment as we were, but they had even less ability to escape. A child may eventually find a door, a phone, or another adult. A dog locked inside a room or enclosure can only wait. My brother eventually managed to escape. He got away from the trailer and went to our biological father. That took courage. Leaving an abusive adult can be dangerous, especially when you do not know what will happen if they catch you. My brother may have understood that staying was worse. Once he escaped, I was left behind with my stepfather and the dogs. I knew my brother had reached someone safer. I also knew I had not. I would eventually be rescued too, but there were still several days before that happened. Those days felt much longer because I did not know exactly when anyone would come. I was still a child. I had very little control over where I went, what I ate, or what I was forced to do. My stepfather used that control. At one point, he made me carry marijuana for him so he could hide it from the police. I was a child being used to conceal drugs. I may not have fully understood the legal consequences, but I understood that he wanted the police not to find it. He was using me because he believed officers might be less suspicious of a child. He placed his own protection above mine. If the police had found the drugs on me, I could have been frightened, questioned, or placed in an even more confusing situation. He did not care about that. He cared about keeping the drugs away from himself. Being forced to carry them made me feel trapped in another way. It was not only that I lived with an abusive man. He was pulling me into his actions and making me part of things I did not choose. Children in abusive homes are often forced to protect adults who do not protect them. They are told to lie. They are told to hide things. They are told not to speak about what happens inside the home. They may be threatened with punishment or told the family will be broken apart if they tell the truth. I do not remember every word my stepfather used, but I remember the reality clearly. I was expected to help hide his drugs while he neglected the people and animals around him. The dogs suffered badly during this period. He locked them away. He did not give them enough food. He did not provide proper water. In the Florida heat, a lack of water can become dangerous quickly. Dogs cannot explain that they are becoming weak or dehydrated. They show it through their bodies. They move less. They become tired. They may stop responding normally. If an animal is already ill, the lack of care can make everything worse. One of our dogs had what I understood to be a common disease in that trailer park or area. I do not know the exact medical name, and I do not want to guess. Whatever the illness was, it eventually caught up with him. A sick animal needs treatment, nutrition, water, and careful attention. Instead, our dogs were locked away and neglected. I could not save them by myself. That is one of the hardest things to accept. Children often feel responsible for animals because the animals look to them for comfort. I may have wanted to open the door, find food, or give them water, but I was also afraid of my stepfather. I did not have money, transportation, or the power to take them to a veterinarian. I was a child trying to survive the same person who was hurting them. Knowing they were suffering and being unable to stop it created a guilt that did not belong to me, but still felt real. Eventually, someone came for me. I was rescued and taken away from the trailer. Leaving should have been only relief, but it was complicated. I was getting out. The dogs were still there. King, Nika, and Prince could not simply come with me. Later, we returned to pick up our clothes and belongings. Going back must have been frightening. The trailer still held the memories of everything that had happened. The roaches, rats, drugs, violence, and neglect were all connected to that place. When we arrived, the dogs were still alive. That is important because there was still a chance. They had survived up to that point. We could see them. We knew they needed help. For some reason, however, we were unable to take them with us. I do not fully understand or remember why. Maybe there were legal ownership issues. Perhaps the adults involved believed they could not remove the animals from the property without permission. There may have been no space, transportation, or immediate safe place for 3 dogs. Whatever the reason, we left without them. That decision still hurts. It is easy for someone outside the situation to say we should have simply taken them. As a child, I did not control the decision. I could not force the adults to load the dogs into a car. I could not remain behind alone to care for them. I had just been rescued from an abusive home. I had no power, but seeing them alive and leaving them there meant I knew exactly what danger remained. My grandmother reported the situation to animal services. She told them the dogs were being neglected and abused. There should have been an investigation. Someone should have gone to the trailer, checked the animals, and removed them if they had no food or water. Animal services existed for situations like that. We believed reporting it would lead to help. According to what I was told and what happened afterward, they did nothing. Maybe a report was lost. Perhaps someone decided there was not enough evidence. Maybe officers visited and accepted a false explanation. I do not know what happened inside the agency. What I know is that the dogs were not rescued in time. King and Nika died. They did not die because nobody knew. The situation had been reported. People were aware that they were being neglected. Still, help did not reach them. That is one of the most painful parts of the story. Abuse is terrible on its own. Reporting it and watching the system fail can make it feel even worse. We had done what people tell children and families to do. Tell an adult, contact authorities, report the danger, then wait for professionals to act. But the dogs remained with the same person. King and Nika died while the people who were supposed to protect animals failed to remove them. I do not know every detail of their final days. I do not know exactly whether they died from starvation, dehydration, disease, or a combination of neglect and illness. I only know they should have been cared for, and they were not. Prince survived longer. I do not know what eventually happened to him. He remained with my abusive former stepfather, and I have always feared that he died too. By now, even if Prince survived the abuse, he would likely have died from age because many years have passed. But I never received the kind of ending where I knew he was taken somewhere safe, given food, and treated with kindness. The uncertainty remained. Not knowing can be its own form of grief. When someone tells you an animal died, the pain is clear. When you do not know, part of your mind keeps imagining possibilities. Maybe Prince escaped. Maybe someone else took him. Maybe he lived. Or maybe he suffered the same fate as King and Nika. I have no proof of the final outcome. I only know he was left with a man who had already shown he could neglect animals. My stepfather's abuse did not end only because we escaped. He continued harassing my mother. At one point, he confronted or harassed her across the street while she was on her way to work. That incident finally led to his arrest. For a moment, it may have seemed as though he would finally face consequences, but his brother paid his bail. He was released. As far as I know, he was never properly held accountable for choking my mother, abusing my brother, forcing me to hide drugs, or neglecting the dogs. He walked free. That is difficult to accept. People like to believe abuse leads to justice. A violent person is arrested. The evidence is presented. The victim is protected. The animals are rescued. The abuser is punished. That is how the story is supposed to end. Real life often does not work that way. Domestic violence can be difficult to prove, especially when victims are frightened, financially dependent, or moving between unstable places. Children may not be interviewed properly. Animal neglect cases may be ignored until it is too late. A person can be arrested for one incident and still avoid punishment for everything that came before it. My former stepfather continued living while the rest of us carried what he had done. My mother carried the memory of being choked. My brother carried the memory of being ignored and starved. I carried the memory of being forced to hide drugs and leaving the dogs behind. King and Nika lost their lives. Prince's fate remained uncertain. The person responsible did not carry the same consequences. That unfairness stays with me. When I think back to Florida, I do not think first about beaches, sunshine, or vacations. I think about the trailer park. I remember roaches moving through the place. I remember rats eating our bread. I remember how unsafe everything felt. I remember my mother being attacked. I remember my brother escaping. I remember the dogs being locked away. I remember being told to carry marijuana so the police would not find it on my stepfather. Those memories are not one frightening moment. They are a whole period of life shaped by fear. The choking incident was one of the clearest examples of his violence. Strangulation is especially terrifying because it can become deadly quickly. At the time, I may not have understood how serious it was. I only saw my mother struggling against a man who had his hands around her neck. Now I understand that she could have died. If she had not managed to get him off her, the story might have ended very differently. Children who witness violence against a parent often remember more than adults realize. They remember the sounds. They remember where everyone stood. They remember the expression on the victim's face. They remember what happened afterward, when the house became silent and everyone acted as though life had to continue. Even if details fade, the fear remains. I also think about the way abuse spread through the entire household. My stepfather did not hurt only one person. He attacked my mother. He starved and ignored my brother. He used me to hide drugs. He neglected and abused the dogs. Violent people often choose whoever has the least power. A partner, a child, an animal, anyone who depends on them or cannot easily leave. The pattern was the same. He wanted control. Food became control. Transportation became control. Fear became control. The dog's confinement became control. Making me carry the marijuana was another form of control. He turned the whole trailer into a place where only his needs mattered. My brother's escape showed me that leaving was possible. I do not know exactly how he got to our biological father, but he found a way. His decision may also have helped bring attention to what was happening. Once one child reaches safety and tells the truth, adults can begin asking questions. A few days later, I was rescued too. Those days between his escape and mine must have been frightening. I knew he was gone. I may have wondered whether my stepfather would punish me because my brother had left. I may have worried that nobody was coming for me. In abusive situations, even a short wait can feel endless. You do not know what the adult will do next. You do not know whether they suspect you are planning to leave. You do not know whether the police will appear or whether the person will force you to move somewhere else first. I survived those days. I was eventually removed. That does not erase the fact that I had been placed in danger by adults who should have protected me. My mother was also a victim. It is easy for outsiders to ask why someone stays with an abusive partner or why a family goes somewhere unsafe. The situation from inside is much more complicated. There may be money problems, threats, promises, fear, love, dependence, or isolation. The abuser may behave kindly sometimes and violently at others. They may apologize, blame drugs, blame stress, or promise to change. They may convince everyone that leaving will make things worse. My mother was trying to manage a dangerous person while also caring for children. She was physically attacked and later arrested over a vehicle issue, leaving us in his control. I do not blame her for everything that followed. The responsibility belongs to the person who chose abuse. I wish the authorities had protected us and the animals more quickly. I wish the report to Animal Services had been taken seriously. I wish King and Nika had been removed while they were still alive. I wish Prince had been placed with a safe family. I wish domestic violence charges had led to real consequences. But wishing does not change the ending. The system failed in ways that allowed the damage to continue. The story taught me that reporting abuse is important, but a report alone does not always guarantee action. Sometimes people have to call repeatedly. They have to document conditions, take photographs, involve multiple agencies, or find organizations willing to push harder. A child should not have to know any of that. A child should be able to say, "We are not safe," and have adults respond. An animal should not have to reach the edge of death before someone decides neglect is serious. King and Nika deserved better. They were not objects left in a dirty trailer. They were living animals who depended on people. They needed food and water. They needed medical care. They needed someone to open the door and take them away. Instead, they died. Their names remain part of the story because they mattered. King, Nika, Prince. People sometimes speak about pets as though losing them is less important than losing a person. For children, animals can be the safest relationships in the home. They may be the only ones who offer comfort without creating fear. Watching them suffer can be deeply traumatic. I could not explain to the dogs why we were leaving. I could not promise help would come. I could only see them alive during that final visit, and then learn later that 2 had died. That helplessness stayed with me. I also carry anger toward my former stepfather, not only because he hurt us, but because he appeared to face so little punishment. He was arrested later for harassing my mother, but he was bailed out by his brother. To my knowledge, he was never successfully charged or punished for the domestic violence and animal abuse. The idea that someone can choke a woman, starve children and animals, use a child to conceal drugs, and still continue walking free is difficult to understand. Justice is not automatic. Sometimes harmful people avoid it. That does not mean the abuse was not real. It does not mean the victims failed. It means the systems around them did not provide the outcome they deserved. I am older now, and I can name things that I could not name then. Domestic violence, child abuse, animal cruelty, drug-related exploitation, neglect, coercion. At the time, it was simply life inside the trailer. Children often accept their environment because they have no other choice. They do not wake each morning and say, "I am living in an abusive household." They wake up and think about food, school, pets, and whether the angry adult is in a good mood. The abnormal becomes normal because it happens every day. Only after leaving do you see how wrong it was. The rats eating our bread were not just a disgusting memory, they showed how little stability we had. The roaches were not only insects, they were part of a place where nobody with power cared about health or safety. The dogs being locked away were not only neglected pets, they were another example of how my stepfather treated vulnerable lives. The marijuana was not only a drug, it was evidence that he would risk a child to protect himself. Each detail connects to the same truth. We were living under the control of someone who did not value our well-being. The moment my mother got him off her after he choked her may have been the first time I understood he could kill someone. The moment my brother escaped showed that staying was not the only option. The moment I was rescued showed that adults outside the trailer could still help. But the deaths of King and Nika showed that rescue did not reach everyone. That is why the story has no completely happy ending. My brother and I got out. My mother survived. I survived. But 2 dogs died. One dog's fate remained unclear, and the abuser was not properly held accountable. Survival is important, but it does not erase loss. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my brother had not escaped. Would anyone have known how bad things were? Would I have been forced to hide more drugs? Would the violence have become worse? Could my mother have returned and been attacked again? Could one of us have been seriously injured or killed? Those questions do not have answers. The fact that we escaped means they remained possibilities instead of events. I am grateful for that. I am grateful my brother reached our biological father. I am grateful someone eventually came for me. I am grateful my mother survived being choked. But gratitude exists beside anger. We should never have been placed there. The dogs should have been rescued. The authorities should have acted. My former stepfather should have faced consequences. The story remains one of the darkest periods of my childhood because it involved so many forms of fear at once. There was physical danger from a violent adult. There was hunger and neglect. There were drugs. There was an unsafe home full of pests. There was uncertainty about where my mother was. There was the fear of what would happen after my brother escaped. There was the suffering of animals I loved. There was the realization that even reporting abuse did not guarantee help. All of it happened inside a place that was supposed to be our home. I do not know whether my former stepfather ever changed. I do not know whether he ever admitted what he did. People like him often tell a different version of the story. They blame the victim. They say they were stressed. They claim the animals were fine. They say the children are exaggerating. They point to the absence of convictions as proof of innocence. But a lack of punishment does not rewrite what I saw. I saw him choke my mother. I experienced the fear in that trailer. I know my brother escaped to our biological father. I know I was made to carry marijuana to hide it from police. I know the dogs were locked away without proper food and water. I know King and Nika died after animal services failed to rescue them. Those are the parts of the story I carry. I wish I had a better ending for Prince. I wish I could say someone arrived at the trailer, broke open the place where the dogs were being held, and took all 3 to safety. I wish I could say they received treatment, gained weight, and lived with families who loved them. That is not the ending I was given. King and Nika died. Prince survived for some time, but I do not know what happened later. The uncertainty is painful, but I will not invent a rescue that may never have occurred. The final legal outcome was also disappointing. My former stepfather was arrested after harassing my mother near her workplace, but his brother bailed him out. As far as I know, the domestic violence and animal abuse never led to meaningful punishment. He walked free. We were left with the memories. That is the truth of many abusive situations. The person who causes the damage moves on. The victims spend years trying to understand, heal, and rebuild. My mother, brother, and I survived Florida. We escaped the trailer park. We escaped him. But parts of that place came with us. The smell of the trailer, the rats eating bread, the roaches, the dogs waiting behind a locked door, the sight of my mother fighting for breath, the fear of being found with drugs I had been forced to carry, the knowledge that help came too late for King and Nika. Those things did not disappear simply because we crossed a state line or entered a safer home. They became memories we had to live with. I tell this story because abuse is not always one dramatic attack. Sometimes it is an entire environment. It is a dirty trailer, empty food, frightened animals, missing water, hidden drugs, and a child waiting for rescue. It is an adult using violence and then acting as though everyone else is the problem. It is a system receiving a report and failing to respond before animals die. It is an arrest that leads to bail instead of accountability. Most of all, It is vulnerable people and animals being forced to survive someone who should never have had power over them. My stepfather was not dangerous because I call him evil now. I call him evil because of what he chose to do. He attacked my mother. He abused my brother. He used me. He neglected our dogs. He allowed 2 of them to die. And when the system had chances to stop him, it failed again and again. My family survived, but not everyone did. That is why I will never forget King, Nika, and Prince, or the trailer in Florida where a trip with family turned into something none of us should ever have experienced. When I was in college, I had a roommate whose father called him constantly for a period of time. My roommate and I were both studying engineering, which meant our schedules were already packed with lectures, projects, labs, exams, and more homework than either of us could reasonably finish. We were usually tired, stressed, and surrounded by books, notes, half-finished assignments, and whatever food we could prepare without losing too much study time. Then the calls from his father started. At first I did not pay much attention to them. Parents call their children at college all the time. Sometimes they want to check whether they are eating properly, ask about grades, or complain that they do not call home enough. But these calls were different. His father kept insisting that my roommate needed to go and find his sister. The strange part was that I did not even know my roommate had a sister. We had lived together, talked about our families, and spent enough time in the same room that I thought I knew the basic facts of his life. Yet suddenly his father was repeatedly calling him about a sister who was supposedly missing somewhere in Indonesia. The whole situation sounded unreal. My roommate's father seemed to believe that his son should leave college, travel to another country, and somehow find her himself. There did not appear to be a proper plan. There was no clear explanation of where she had last been seen, who she had been with, what local authorities were doing, or why a college student studying engineering was the person expected to solve the problem. The demand was simply repeated over and over. His son needed to find his sister. My roommate was already overloaded. He had deadlines, assignments, and classes he could not casually abandon. He was not a detective, police officer, private investigator, or international rescue worker. Even if he wanted to help, what exactly was he supposed to do? Book a flight to Indonesia? Arrive in a country he may not have known well? Walk around asking strangers if they had seen his sister? The father did not seem interested in practical questions. He only kept calling. Each time the phone rang, the mood in the room changed. My roommate would look at the screen and know what was coming. Another lecture, another demand, another conversation where his father would insist that he was not doing enough. The calls began to feel less like requests for help and more like harassment. One day, after the phone had rung repeatedly, I decided to be cheeky. I convinced my roommate to let me answer. It was partly a joke and partly an attempt to give him a break. I thought I could speak to his father, ask a few questions, and perhaps make him understand how unreasonable his demands sounded. My roommate agreed. I picked up the phone and began talking. At first, his father did not realize I was not his son. Maybe our voices sounded similar over the phone, or perhaps he was so focused on what he wanted to say that he did not pay attention. I let the conversation continue for a moment. Then he began to realize something was wrong. He paused and asked whether he was speaking to his son or one of his gay little friends. The insult was meant to be dismissive and cruel. The ironic part was that he had no idea how close he was to the truth. I did not explain anything about myself. I was more interested in hearing what he had to say and trying to understand why he believed his son should leave school to search for someone on the other side of the world. I started asking practical questions. How was his son supposed to leave college? What did he expect him to do in Indonesia? Where was the sister last seen? Who had reported her missing? Were police involved? Did anyone know where she had been staying? The father did not give clear answers. Instead, the conversation moved away from the missing woman and turned into a speech about himself. He told me he had traveled the world. He said he had spent 3 years in seminary school. He talked as though these experiences gave him authority over everything and everyone. What did I know about the world? Who was I to question him? He had experience. He had traveled. He had studied religion. Therefore, in his mind, his demand made sense, and nobody had the right to challenge it. His son needed to go find his sister. That was the only point he kept returning to. It did not matter that his son was in the middle of an engineering degree. It did not matter that traveling internationally cost money. It did not matter that searching for a missing person required information, contacts, and cooperation from authorities. It did not matter that sending another family member into an unfamiliar situation could be dangerous. His son needed to find her. The conversation became increasingly aggressive. The more I questioned the logic, the more he spoke about his own life and experience. He seemed offended that anyone would ask him to explain the plan. He did not appear to want a discussion. He wanted obedience. Eventually, he became angry enough to hang up. At the time, the call felt bizarre more than frightening. It was the kind of strange family story that can happen in college, when roommates come from very different backgrounds, and you occasionally see parts of their private lives you were never expecting. After the call ended, my roommate and I probably laughed about some of it. The comment about his gay little friends was ridiculous. The speech about traveling the world and attending seminary school sounded like someone trying to establish authority because he could not answer straightforward questions. His demand that a college student suddenly fly to Indonesia was so unrealistic that it was difficult to take seriously. I did not think I had spoken to a dangerous person. I thought I had spoken to an angry, unreasonable father. The missing sister remained a strange part of the story. I still knew almost nothing about her. My roommate did not talk about her much, at least not to me. I did not know how long she had been missing, why she was in Indonesia, or what contact the family had previously had with her. The father's calls eventually stopped being a central part of our daily lives. College continued. Assignments were due. Exams arrived. We spent our time trying to survive engineering school. Then, a few months later, something happened that completely changed the meaning of that phone call. My roommate's father apparently gambled the last of his money on the Super Bowl. He lost. The loss led to his trailer being repossessed. That detail alone said something about the chaos in his life. He had spent months pressuring his son to abandon school and travel across the world, yet he was willing to risk his remaining money on a football game. When the trailer was repossessed, people went through it. That was when they found the body of my roommate's sister inside a freezer. I heard that she may have been dismembered or found in pieces, but I am not completely certain about that detail, so I cannot present it as fact. What I understood clearly was that her body was discovered in the freezer inside her father's trailer. The same man who had repeatedly called his son and demanded that he travel to Indonesia to search for her had apparently known exactly where she was. She had not been lost somewhere across the world. She had been dead inside his property. The calls suddenly looked completely different. What had sounded like the confused demands of an unstable father now seemed like an attempt to create a story. He wanted people to believe his daughter had disappeared in Indonesia. He wanted his son to act as though that story were true. Perhaps he hoped that sending his son there would make the disappearance seem more believable. Maybe he wanted the family focused on another country, while the body remained hidden much closer to home. It is possible he was trying to create witnesses who could later say that everyone believed she had vanished abroad. I cannot know his exact thinking. I only know that the explanation he had been pushing was false. He had demanded that his son search for a person whose body was later found in his own freezer. That realization was horrifying. I began replaying my conversation with him. I had asked questions about how his son was supposed to find her. I had asked what he expected his son to do in Indonesia. He had responded by talking about traveling the world, attending seminary, and how little I understood. At the time, I thought he was avoiding the questions because he was arrogant or irrational. Later, I wondered whether he was avoiding them because any real answer would have exposed the lie. He could not provide useful information about the search because he knew there was no real search to conduct. He could not explain where his daughter had last been seen because the story may have been invented. He could not describe a practical plan because the purpose was not actually to find her. The purpose may have been to move attention away from him. That changes the emotional weight of every sentence. When he said his son needed to find his sister, he may have been speaking about someone he had already killed. When he insisted she was in Indonesia, he may have known her body was only a short distance from where he stood. When he became angry at my questions, he may not simply have been offended. He may have been afraid I was asking things he could not answer safely. I had treated the call like a strange joke. I had no idea I might have been speaking to someone hiding a body. The thought still makes me uncomfortable. Most people imagine that speaking to a murderer would feel obviously wrong. They expect a cold voice, a threatening tone, or some dramatic sign of evil. But he sounded like an angry father. He was rude. He was controlling. He was defensive. Nothing in the call gave me enough information to understand what had allegedly happened. If I had passed him on the street, I might not have noticed anything unusual. That is what makes real cases like this so disturbing. A person can commit something terrible and still make phone calls, tell stories, argue, gamble, and speak about ordinary things. The crime does not change their appearance into that of a monster. They remain human. They can sound annoying rather than frightening. They can make ridiculous comments. They can speak about religion and travel. They can even present themselves as the concerned parent. In this case, the father had supposedly spent years building a life story that made him sound experienced and worldly. He had traveled. He had studied at a seminary. He used those facts as proof that he understood more than the rest of us. Yet behind all that talk, there was something unimaginably dark. The seminary detail became especially disturbing in retrospect. He presented it as evidence of wisdom or moral authority. Someone who had studied religion for years might be expected to speak about compassion, truth, and responsibility. Instead, he used it as a way to dismiss questions. He did not respond with concern for his daughter or explain how anyone could help her. He turned the conversation into a contest over who knew more about life. Perhaps that was simply his personality. Maybe he always spoke that way. But after the body was found, everything about him seemed more calculated. His arrogance may have protected him from scrutiny. If someone questioned him, he attacked their intelligence or experience. If they asked for facts, he changed the subject. If his son resisted, he accused him of failing his sister. That kind of pressure could make a person feel guilty enough to follow instructions without thinking clearly. My roommate was placed in an impossible position. His father repeatedly told him that his sister was missing and that he had a duty to find her. If he refused, he risked being treated as uncaring. If he agreed, he might have abandoned his education and traveled internationally based on a lie. He did not know his father was apparently directing him away from the actual location of the body. I cannot imagine what learning the truth did to him. It was his sister. It was his father. The man calling him for help was allegedly responsible for the very thing he claimed needed to be solved. That betrayal goes far beyond an ordinary family secret. My roommate had to learn that one member of his family was dead and another may have killed her. He also had to remember every call, every demand, every accusation, every time his father told him to go find her. Those calls were no longer only annoying. They became part of the cover story. My roommate may have wondered whether he should have recognized something. Could he have asked different questions? Could he have contacted police sooner? Could he have saved his sister? Those questions would be natural, but the responsibility did not belong to him. He had been lied to by someone who had a lifetime of knowledge about how to manipulate him. A son is not supposed to assume his father has murdered his sister and hidden her in a freezer. That is not a reasonable conclusion to reach from a series of phone calls. The story about Indonesia may have been strange, but families often contain strange stories. People disappear while traveling. Relatives become confused or irrational under stress. Parents make unreasonable demands. Nothing automatically points to a body inside a trailer. The truth was too extreme to guess. I thought about the repossession too. If his father had not gambled away his remaining money, the trailer might not have been taken. If the trailer had not been repossessed, perhaps nobody would have opened the freezer. The body might have remained hidden much longer. That means his own reckless gambling may have led to the discovery. He did not confess. He did not guide police to her. He lost his home after betting on a football game, and the process exposed what was inside. The randomness of that chain is disturbing. A person's death was revealed because someone made another foolish decision. Had the bet gone differently, the truth might have remained hidden. I do not know how long the body had been there. I do not know what evidence investigators found or what legal process followed. The account I received was that the sister's body was found in the freezer after the trailer was repossessed, and that the father was responsible for her death. I did not personally witness the discovery, so those parts of the story come from what I learned afterward. The only part I witnessed directly was the phone call. That was enough to make the later news feel personal. I had heard his voice. I had challenged his story. I had spoken about the missing woman while she was apparently already dead. I had no idea. When people hear about murder cases, the victim can become a name in an article, and the suspect becomes a photograph. For me, there was a voice attached to it. I remembered the father becoming angry. I remembered him talking about his travels and education. I remembered his insult. I remembered the repeated demand that his son go find his sister. After the discovery, those memories stopped being funny. The call became one of the most unsettling conversations of my life. I wonder what he thought while speaking to me. Did he see the call as part of maintaining his story? Was he irritated because I was not the person he intended to manipulate? Did my questions make him nervous? Did he consider changing his explanation afterward? Or was he so confident that he felt no fear at all? Maybe he believed nobody would ever search the trailer. Perhaps he thought the story about Indonesia would be enough. If he had traveled widely, he may have known that international disappearances are difficult to investigate. Different jurisdictions, languages, travel records, and long distances can complicate a search. Saying she vanished abroad could make the family feel helpless. It could also create confusion about which authorities should be responsible. The lie may have been chosen because it was hard to disprove quickly. Again, I cannot know whether that was his plan. But the location was specific enough to sound intentional. He did not merely say she had run away. He claimed she was in Indonesia. That gave the disappearance an exotic, distant quality. It placed the truth thousands of miles from his trailer. The more impossible the search became, the safer he may have felt. The demand that his son personally travel there also served another purpose. If my roommate had gone, his actions would have made the story look legitimate. He might have contacted people, searched neighborhoods, spoken to officials, and told others his sister was missing in Indonesia. Every step would repeat the father's lie. The son could unknowingly become part of the cover-up. That possibility makes the calls feel much more calculated. His father may not only have wanted him distracted, he may have wanted him to provide evidence that the family believed the false story. The call I answered interrupted that process for a few minutes. Instead of speaking to his son, he found himself talking to a roommate who had no emotional connection to him and was willing to ask direct questions. I was not afraid of disappointing him. I did not feel family guilt. When he said his son needed to find his sister, I asked how that was supposed to work. He could not control me in the same way. Maybe that was why he became so hostile. The insult about gay little friends was probably intended to put me in my place. It was a way to reduce me to something he could dismiss. If he could make me feel embarrassed or defensive, perhaps I would stop questioning him. Instead, the comment only made the situation more absurd. At the time, I treated it as an almost funny example of his ignorance. Later, it became part of a pattern. He used contempt whenever facts were inconvenient. He described himself as experienced and knowledgeable, while treating everyone else as foolish. That kind of person can be difficult to challenge, because every question becomes an attack in their mind. They do not answer, they dominate. Eventually, he hung up, ending the conversation on his terms. I did not know that I had just spoken to someone who would later be connected to a body hidden in a freezer. There is a common idea that people should trust their instincts when someone feels wrong. Sometimes that advice is useful. But this conversation did not create a clear instinct that he was a murderer. He seemed unstable, offensive, and controlling. Those qualities are concerning, but they are not proof of murder. If I had called police and said, "My roommate's father keeps insisting his son travel to Indonesia to find his sister," what would they have done? Maybe they would have asked whether the sister was officially missing. Perhaps they would have looked into it. But from my position, I had almost no information. I did not even know the sister existed before the calls. I did not know her full name, age, or last known location. I was a college student making a joke by answering my roommate's phone. I had no reason to think a freezer should be searched. That is why I do not blame myself for missing the truth. Still, hindsight is powerful. Once you know the ending, every earlier detail looks like a clue. The repeated calls become desperation to control the story. The demand to travel becomes misdirection. The anger becomes fear of being questioned. The speech about worldly experience becomes manipulation. The seminary becomes hypocrisy. The gambling becomes recklessness. The repossession becomes the accidental opening of a crime scene. But before the ending, the clues did not form a clear picture. They were only strange pieces. The body in the freezer gave them meaning. I also think about the sister herself. She had been reduced in the father's story to someone who needed to be found. He spoke about her absence, but not about her as a person. I do not remember him expressing grief, fear, or concern for her safety in a way that felt genuine. His focus was on ordering his son to act. Maybe he did express emotion at other times. I heard only one conversation. I should not claim he never showed concern. But during my call, he seemed more interested in authority than in his daughter. That became chilling later. A truly worried father might have answered questions about where she was last seen or what help was needed. He might have asked us to contact police, share her photograph, or speak to people who knew her. Instead, he returned to one demand. His son had to go. It was as though the action mattered more than the result. The sister's body being discovered inside his freezer meant she had been physically close, while he described her as far away. That contrast is difficult to process. A freezer is an ordinary household object. People store food in it. They open it without thinking. Inside his trailer, it allegedly concealed a human body. The normal life around it continued. He made calls. He gambled. He argued. He may have walked past it every day. That is one of the most horrifying details, even without knowing whether the body was intact or dismembered. The victim was hidden inside the same place where he lived. The secret was not buried in a remote forest or lost in another country. It was inside his home. When the trailer was repossessed, the people handling it probably expected abandoned belongings, unpaid bills, old furniture, and rubbish. They could not have expected to discover a body. Imagine opening a freezer during a routine repossession and realizing what is inside. The shock would have been immediate. Whatever happened next would bring police, investigators, and a complete change in how the father's earlier claims were understood. Indonesia was no longer a missing person location. It was part of a lie. My roommate's life would have changed instantly. He was no longer only an engineering student struggling with assignments and an overbearing parent. He was connected to a homicide investigation involving his own family. College stress must have become meaningless beside that. Exams can be retaken, projects can be delayed. Learning that your sister's body has been found inside your father's trailer changes every part of reality. I do not know how much support he received or what happened to him afterward. The story I carry is mostly about the strange position I found myself in. I had spoken to the father before anyone around us knew what he had allegedly done. I had asked him about the person he was accused of killing. I had listened to him demand that his son search for her while he apparently knew she could never be found alive. That is what makes the memory so unsettling. I was not present at the crime. I did not see the body. I was not involved in the investigation. But for a few minutes, I unknowingly stood at the edge of the lie. I questioned it without understanding what I was questioning. He responded without revealing what he was hiding. Then we both hung up and continued our lives for several months. He knew. I did not. That difference was enormous. Sometimes I wonder whether there was a moment during the call when he considered that I might know more than I did. When I asked how his son was supposed to travel to Indonesia and find her, did he wonder whether someone had discovered the body? Did he think my roommate had told me a secret? Was his anger partly an attempt to test me? Perhaps not. Maybe he saw me as nothing more than an irritating college student. But when someone is hiding a major crime, even ordinary questions can become dangerous. The conversation may have felt very different from his side. I thought I was challenging an absurd parent. He may have been defending a cover story. The story also changed how I think about the word missing. When someone disappears, people naturally imagine uncertainty. Maybe they left voluntarily. Maybe they are lost. Maybe they were harmed by a stranger. The family member calling for help is usually assumed to be frightened and innocent, but sometimes the person making the most noise already knows the answer. A public search can become a performance. Calls for help can become camouflage. The person responsible may place themselves at the center of the concern to appear less suspicious. I do not know whether my roommate's father contacted authorities or other relatives with the same story, but his repeated calls to his son suggest he wanted the disappearance discussed and acted upon in a specific way. He needed the focus directed outward, anywhere except the trailer. The gambling loss destroyed that control. Money ran out. The trailer was taken. Other people entered the space. The freezer was opened. The truth no longer depended on his explanation. Physical evidence replaced his words. There is a dark kind of justice in the fact that his own reckless behavior may have exposed him. He gambled his remaining money and lost the property hiding the body. Still, there is nothing satisfying about the outcome. A woman was dead, her brother had been manipulated, a family was destroyed. The discovery only ended the lie. It could not undo the murder. I have told this story before, and it can sound almost unbelievable because the beginning is so ridiculous. Two engineering students are overwhelmed with homework. A strange father will not stop calling. One roommate jokingly answers the phone. The father makes an insulting comment and begins bragging about his travels and seminary education. Months later, a repossessed trailer reveals a body in a freezer. It sounds like a plot written to shock people, but the absurdity is part of what makes it feel real. Life does not always present horror in a serious tone from the beginning. Sometimes a terrible story starts with an irritating phone call and a joke between roommates. The meaning changes only later. I still remember believing the father was simply an arrogant fool. I thought the strangest part of the call was his demand that his son fly to Indonesia. I thought the funniest part was the way he failed to recognize my voice and then insulted me. I thought the conversation had ended when he hung up. It had not. The real ending was waiting inside his trailer. I am careful when describing him as a murderer because I did not personally witness the killing or legal proceedings. What I learned afterward was that his daughter's body was found in his freezer and that he was held responsible for her death. The uncertain detail about whether she was found in pieces is something I heard but cannot confirm. I do not need that detail for the story to be horrifying. A body inside the freezer is enough. The repeated false claims about Indonesia are enough. The knowledge that I spoke directly to him about her before the discovery is enough. I have often wondered what happened to the phone after his arrest or disappearance from our lives. Did investigators examine his calls? Did they see how many times he contacted his son? Did the conversations become evidence? Could my roommate have told them what his father kept saying? Maybe the insistence on Indonesia helped prove that he was deliberately creating a false narrative. Perhaps it showed consciousness of guilt. I cannot know. From my perspective, the calls were part of college life until suddenly they became part of something criminal. That transformation is what remains with me. Ordinary things can carry hidden meaning. A phone ringing can be a father checking on his son. It can also be a man trying to force his child into repeating a lie. A story about a missing traveler can be a genuine plea for help. It can also be an attempt to move suspicion thousands of miles away. A freezer can be an appliance. It can also conceal the answer everyone is being told to search for elsewhere. I think about my roommate more than I think about the father. The father was responsible for his own choices. My roommate was pulled into a nightmare he did not create. He had to live with the knowledge that his father repeatedly used him. If he had obeyed and gone to Indonesia, he could have spent money, lost time, and risked his education while searching for someone who was never there. He may have carried guilt for refusing. Then he learned that refusal had nothing to do with his sister's death. She was already beyond help. His father had placed an impossible burden on him to protect himself. That is an especially cruel form of manipulation. It weaponizes love. Of course, a brother wants to help his sister. Of course, a son may feel pressure when his father says the family needs him. The father used those feelings to create action. When practical questions were asked, he answered with anger. The more I think about it, the more calculated it seems. But I also recognize that people who commit violent crimes do not always behave according to a clear plan. He may have been panicking. He may have been unstable. The calls could have been impulsive attempts to make the story feel real even to himself. I cannot know whether every action was carefully designed. I only know the result. He directed attention toward Indonesia while the body was allegedly hidden in his trailer. I sometimes replay my own tone during the call. I was being cheeky. I may have sounded sarcastic. I probably enjoyed frustrating him. Had I known the truth, I would have approached everything differently. I might have recorded the call. I might have asked more specific questions. I might have contacted authorities. But nobody speaks casually to someone while knowing they are hiding a murder. The entire point is that I did not know. That ignorance allowed the conversation to remain almost comedic. Only later did it become horrifying. The last thing I remember clearly is him ending the call. He had said his piece. His son needed to find his sister. I did not understand the world. He had traveled and studied religion. Then he hung up. Months later, the freezer told a different story. His daughter had not simply vanished into another country. She had been hidden near him. The person demanding the search was apparently the person who made sure she could never be found alive. That is why I consider it one of the strangest encounters of my life. I once picked up my roommate's phone as a joke and spoke directly to a man about a missing woman. I asked how his son was supposed to find her. He became angry, bragged about his experience, and insisted that the son had to go. At the time, I thought he was only unreasonable. Later, when the trailer was repossessed and his daughter's body was found in the freezer, I understood that the entire conversation had taken place in the shadow of a crime none of us yet knew about. I had spoken to him about the person he was accused of murdering. He knew exactly where she was. I did not. That is the part I will never forget. One night, I saw something in my bedroom that I have never been able to explain. I do not know whether it was a ghost, some unusual kind of light, a trick of my eyes, or something else entirely. I only know what I saw, and the memory has remained clear because it did not behave like any normal light I had seen before. There were two green orbs. They floated through my room together. What made them so strange was not only their color or the fact that they appeared to move through the air. They were both the same size, remained the same distance apart, and stayed at a height that was very close to where a person's eyes would be. It looked almost as though an invisible figure were moving across the room, and the only parts I could see were its glowing green eyes. I was in my bedroom at night. The room was dark enough that any new light would have been easy to notice. I cannot remember whether I had just gone to bed, had already been lying awake for a while, or had woken during the night. What I remember is becoming aware of the green light and looking toward it. At first I saw two separate glowing shapes. They were not tiny points like the lights on an electronic device. They were round, clearly visible, and bright enough to illuminate the space around them. Each orb appeared to be about the same size as the other. They did not move independently. They traveled together as a pair. The gap between them remained steady, almost exactly like the distance between two human eyes. One did not move ahead of the other. They did not circle around one another or drift apart. They stayed level. They stayed matched. They moved as though both lights were attached to the same invisible object. That was the detail that made the sight feel less like two random lights and more like something looking into the room. I could not see a face around them. There was no visible head, body, or outline. There were only the two green orbs moving through the darkness. Normally, if you see two lights in a room, there is an obvious source. They may be reflections from a window, lights from a passing car, indicators on a charger, or the eyes of an animal catching light. These lights did not seem to match any of those explanations. They were inside the room. They moved smoothly through it. They also gave off their own light. As the orbs traveled, the green glow spread in every direction. It was not a flat image on the wall or a reflection that remained only on one surface. The light touched objects around the room. That is one of the strongest parts of the memory. The shadows moved. As the orbs passed furniture and other objects, their shadows changed position. A shadow would stretch in one direction, then shift as the lights moved farther across the room. That made the experience feel physically present. If the lights had only appeared inside my vision, I might expect the room around them to remain unchanged. Instead, the objects seemed to react to the light in the same way they would react to a moving lamp. The glow fell across real surfaces. The darkness changed around it. For those few moments, the room was being lit by something moving through the air. I watched the shadows slide. I saw the shape of the furniture change against the walls. The light was green, but it behaved like real illumination. It was not only two bright dots. It filled part of the room as it moved. I remember being surprised by how calm I felt. People often imagine that seeing something possibly supernatural would cause immediate terror. They picture screaming, hiding under a blanket, or running from the room. I did none of those things. I was not frozen with fear. I was not thinking that I was in danger. I was mostly surprised and confused. The experience happened so quickly and quietly that my mind may not have had enough time to become frightened. I was focused on watching it and trying to understand what I was seeing. The orbs did not rush toward me. They did not make a threatening movement. They did not change direction suddenly or react to my presence. They simply floated through the room. Their movement seemed controlled, but not aggressive. It was almost peaceful. That may be why I did not panic. If the lights had moved directly toward my face, stopped beside my bed, or begun circling me, I probably would have reacted very differently. Instead, they traveled along their path as if they were passing through the room rather than entering it for me. I felt like an observer. Maybe they were aware of me. Maybe they were not. There was no clear sign either way. I cannot remember hearing any sound. There were no footsteps, no breathing, no voice, no electrical buzzing. Nothing scraped against the floor. The lights moved in complete silence. That silence made them feel even stranger because anything physical moving through a room usually creates some noise. A person walking would make the floor creak or clothing move. An animal would tap its paws or disturb something. A flying insect might buzz. The orbs seemed to have no weight and no physical effect except for the light they produced. They did not knock anything over. They did not disturb the air in a way I could feel. They simply floated. I watched them move toward one of the walls. Part of me probably expected them to stop when they reached it. Every normal object has to react to a wall. A person turns, an animal climbs, and a beam of light lands on the surface. These orbs did none of those things. They continued forward. Then they passed through the wall. They did not strike it or disappear just before reaching it. From my perspective, they moved directly into it and vanished on the other side. The moment they were gone, the room became dark again. The change was immediate. One moment, the green light was moving across the furniture and shifting the shadows. The next, there was nothing. No remaining glow. No mark on the wall. No fading trail. Just darkness. I stayed where I was, looking toward the place where they had disappeared. I expected them to return. I thought they might come back through the same wall or appear somewhere else in the room. They did not. The room remained quiet and dark. I may have checked the objects around me to make sure everything looked normal. Perhaps I stared at the wall, trying to find a crack, window, reflective surface, or electronic light that could explain what had happened. There was no obvious source. The darkness after the lights vanished felt ordinary. That made the memory even harder to dismiss. Nothing else unusual happened. There was no dramatic ending. I did not hear a whisper after they disappeared. No door opened. No object moved by itself. The experience began with two green lights entering my awareness and ended when they passed through the wall. I was left with only the question of what they had been. The eye-like spacing was what stayed with me most. If the orbs had been far apart or moving randomly, I might have thought of insects or reflections. Instead, they were positioned exactly where eyes might be on a human-sized figure. They remained the same distance above the ground while moving. They did not rise toward the ceiling or drop toward the floor. It seemed as though they were being carried at head height. That naturally made me imagine an invisible person. I could picture a shape between and behind the lights, even though I did not actually see one. The human mind is built to recognize faces. Two circles placed side by side can immediately look like eyes. Perhaps my brain made the connection because the pattern was familiar. That does not necessarily mean the lights were truly eyes. But it explains why the image felt so unusual. If they were only lights, why did they remain arranged so perfectly? Why did they move together? Why did they stay at the same height? I have considered the possibility that they were the eyes of an animal. Cats and some other animals can have eyes that appear green when light reflects from them. If a cat walked through a dark room, its eyes might look like two glowing points at the same height. But several details do not fit. The orbs seemed much higher from the ground than the eyes of a normal cat. I saw no body beneath them. I heard no pause. Most importantly, animal eyes reflect light rather than strongly illuminating an entire room. They may shine brightly when a flashlight or another light hits them, but they do not normally cast their own moving shadows across furniture. There would also need to be an existing light source positioned correctly to create the reflection. My room was dark. The orbs appeared to emit their own light in all directions. An animal also could not walk through a solid wall. There might have been an opening, doorway, or shadow I failed to see, but in my memory the lights went directly through the wall itself. I have also thought about car headlights. A vehicle passing outside can send moving light through a window. The light may travel across walls and furniture, creating changing shadows. Colored glass, curtains, trees, or reflections can make headlights look unusual, but headlights usually create broad shapes or beams rather than two small round orbs floating freely inside a room. They also move across surfaces. They do not appear to hold a fixed position in open space. If the light came from outside, I would expect it to land on the wall, ceiling, or floor. I would not expect it to look like two objects moving between pieces of furniture. The eye-level spacing would also have been a strange coincidence. Another possibility is a reflection from something inside the room. Small lights from electronics can reflect in glass, mirrors, polished furniture, or windows. If I moved my head, those reflections might appear to move, but I remember remaining still while the orbs traveled through the room on their own. The shadows of objects changed as they passed, which suggests the light was moving in relation to the room rather than only shifting inside my eyes. I could be wrong about that. Memory is not a perfect recording. Over time, the mind can strengthen certain details and lose others. The event happened at night, possibly when I was tired or close to sleep. That means my perception may not have been fully reliable. I could have been in a half-awake state. Some people experience vivid images while falling asleep or waking up. These are sometimes called sleep-related hallucinations. They can look completely real and may involve lights, figures, faces, or movement inside the bedroom. If that was what happened, my brain may have created the two green orbs while I was not fully awake. That would explain why the experience appeared suddenly and ended without any physical evidence. It might also explain why I felt more surprised than afraid. Dreamlike experiences can have an unusual emotional quality. However, I remember the orbs lighting the room and causing shadows to move. That detail makes the memory feel different from a simple image floating in my vision. Of course, the brain can create complex scenes. A hallucination can include the environment and make it seem as though real objects are reacting. Knowing that does not tell me whether that is what happened. I have also wondered about sleep paralysis. People experiencing sleep paralysis often see figures, lights, faces, or dark shapes while being unable to move. The bedroom can look completely real because the person's eyes may be open while part of the mind is still dreaming. I do not remember being unable to move. I do not remember pressure on my chest or the strong fear often connected with sleep paralysis. I simply watched the orbs pass. That makes sleep paralysis seem less likely, although not impossible. Perhaps I had only partially awakened and witnessed a short dream image while still able to move normally. There could also have been something wrong with my eyes. Certain visual effects can create glowing dots, flashes, or shapes. Pressure on the eyes, migraines, changes in blood flow, or other physical causes may create lights inside a person's field of vision. These lights can move and appear bright even in a dark room. But visual effects inside the eyes usually move with the viewer's gaze or appear against everything equally. They would not normally seem to pass behind or in front of specific objects in a consistent three-dimensional path. They also would not create actual shadows, although the brain could possibly interpret the changing room that way. I cannot rule out a visual explanation. I was not examined immediately afterward, and the event did not repeat in exactly the same way. Another idea is that the orbs were some kind of unusual electrical effect. People report seeing ball lightning or other glowing atmospheric phenomena, although these events are rare and not always well understood. Ball lightning is generally described during or near storms and can appear as a floating ball of light. Two equal orbs moving together at eye level would still be unusual. I do not remember a storm, thunder, or electrical damage. The lights also passed through the wall without any sound or visible effect. If they were electrical, I would expect some heat, smell, noise, or reaction from nearby equipment. There was none that I noticed. It is possible that there was a practical explanation I simply failed to find. Maybe someone outside carried two green lights past a window. Perhaps a toy, device, reflection, or decoration created the effect. A moving source outside could have made shadows travel through the room. The lights may only have appeared to pass through the wall because the outside source moved beyond the angle of the window. That would make them disappear suddenly. This is one of the stronger ordinary explanations. Perspective at night can be misleading. A light projected through glass may look as if it is floating inside the room. Without clear depth information, the brain can place the light closer than it really is. As the source moves, it may seem to travel toward a wall and vanish into it. Still, the shape and behavior seemed so specific that the explanation never fully satisfied me. There were two of them. They were equal in size. They remained evenly spaced. They stayed at the height of human eyes. They cast light around the room. They moved silently. Then they passed through the wall. The experience felt less like random light and more like the visible part of something invisible. That is why I sometimes wonder whether I saw a ghost. I do not claim that I definitely did. The word ghost is only one possible label for an event I cannot explain. People often use supernatural words when ordinary categories fail. If a shape moves without a visible body, it becomes a spirit. If a light has no known source, it becomes an orb. If something disappears through a wall, it becomes paranormal. Those labels may describe the feeling of the experience, without explaining what actually happened. I have seen photographs filled with supposed ghost orbs. Many of them can be explained by dust, moisture, insects, or reflections close to the camera lens. My experience did not look like those photographs. These were not pale circles frozen in an image. They were visible to my eyes, moved through the room, and seemed to illuminate real objects. That makes the memory difficult to compare with typical orb stories. They were also green. The color was clear enough to remember. It was not a weak green tint that could have come from my imagination. The light itself appeared green and spread that color around the room. Green light can feel unnatural at night because most indoor light is white, yellow, or orange. Electronics may have small green indicators, but they usually do not light an entire space. The color gave the orbs an almost living quality. Human eyes are not naturally bright green lights, of course, but the pair still reminded me of eyes because of their position. I sometimes wonder whether the color affected my lack of fear. Red lights might have seemed aggressive or dangerous. Bright white light might have been painful. The green glow was strange but not violent. It may have felt calm enough that I remained curious. My reaction has always surprised me. I have been more frightened by normal noises in the dark than I was by those lights. A sudden knock, a creaking door, or a shadow can make the heart race. Yet when something truly unexplained appeared, I mostly watched. Perhaps the mind does not always recognize danger when an event falls outside familiar experience. I had no clear category for what I was seeing. There was no visible attacker. The orbs were not behaving like an animal. They were not moving quickly enough to trigger the instinct to run. My brain may have remained in observation mode because it did not know what response was needed. Fear arrived later, if it arrived at all. After the lights vanished, I probably replayed the scene. I would have looked at the route they took and the wall they entered. Maybe I got out of bed and examined the area. I do not remember finding anything. There was no hole or mark. Nothing had burned. No object had been moved. The wall was solid. The room looked exactly as it had before. That normality made the event feel isolated, like a short piece of another reality had passed through and then closed behind itself. I do not mean that literally. It is only how the memory feels. For a few seconds, the normal rules of the room seemed different. Then everything returned to normal so completely that I had no proof anything happened. I was left with only my own memory. That is the problem with many unexplained experiences. There is no photograph, no recording, no physical object, no second witness. The person who saw it has to decide how much to trust their perception. If I tell someone, they may immediately suggest that I was dreaming. That is reasonable. It happened at night in a bedroom. People are especially likely to misperceive things in darkness or near sleep. I cannot prove I was fully awake. I cannot prove the shadows truly moved rather than appearing to move. I also cannot honestly say I imagined it. The experience felt real while it happened. The room had depth. The light moved in relation to objects. The orbs kept their spacing. They did not behave like random dream images. Dreams often shift or change without logic. These lights followed one smooth path and then disappeared through a wall. The simplicity made it feel more real. There was no long supernatural story. No ghostly woman appeared. No message was delivered. No object flew across the room. Nothing happened before or afterward to create a dramatic pattern. Two lights crossed the room. That was all. In some ways, a larger event would have been easier to classify. If a transparent human figure had appeared, I could say I saw what looked like a person. If an electronic device had turned on, I could investigate it. If a window had been open, I could blame a reflection. The orbs existed between categories. They looked like eyes without a face, They acted like lights without a source. They moved like objects without bodies. They passed through a solid surface. I have sometimes tried to imagine the event from another angle. Suppose an invisible figure really had been walking through the room. Would only its eyes glow? Why would they be green? Why would the figure pass through my room rather than around the building? Was it looking at me? Or was the orientation of the lights only a coincidence? Because the orbs remained side by side, I assumed they faced in my direction, or at least moved sideways through the room. But perhaps their spacing had nothing to do with eyes. They could have been two connected points on an object I could not see. The human eye comparison is my interpretation. Another person might have thought of the lights on a machine, vehicle, or unknown device. The fact that they floated at head height made the eye explanation feel natural, but it did not prove it. If they were eyes, I do not know what they belong to. The idea of an invisible person should frighten me more than it does. Perhaps because the event ended without harm, the memory became more fascinating than terrifying. Whatever it was did not touch me. It did not stop beside the bed. It did not return. It seemed to be traveling somewhere else. I happened to witness it crossing my room. That is the feeling I am left with. It was passing through. I was not its destination. I do not remember seeing the orbs enter through another wall. My awareness may have begun after they were already inside the room. Perhaps they appeared near one side and moved across to the other. If they entered through a wall as well as left through one, I cannot clearly remember that part, so I do not want to add it as fact. The strongest sequence begins when I noticed them floating through the room and ends when they disappeared through the wall. They may have been visible for only a few seconds. Like many short, unexplained events, the memory feels longer because I have examined it so often afterward. I can break it into stages, noticing the green glow, seeing the two separate circles, realizing they were moving together, comparing their position to human eyes, watching the light spread, seeing shadows shift, following them toward the wall. Then darkness. In real time, all of that may have happened quickly. There was no opportunity to grab a phone or call another person. Even if I had tried, the lights might have disappeared before I could record them. I did not think to do anything except watch. That reaction feels natural to me. When something impossible seems to happen, the first instinct may be to understand it, not document it. By the time the mind asks for evidence, the event is over. I have never found an explanation that accounts for every detail. Reflected light could explain the illumination and moving shadows. Sleep-related hallucination could explain the impossible movement through the wall. Eye effects could explain the glowing circles. An animal could explain the spacing. But each explanation solves only part of the experience. Combining them is possible. Maybe I was partly asleep while real outside light moved through the room, and my mind arranged it into two eye-like orbs. That would explain why the shadows seemed real and the objects seemed impossible. A real visual stimulus could have mixed with a dream state. This may be the most reasonable general explanation, but it remains only a possibility. I cannot return to that night and test the lighting conditions. I do not know whether a car passed outside or whether an electronic device was nearby. I do not remember the exact position of curtains, mirrors, or furniture. The evidence exists only in memory, and memory cannot be measured like a physical scene. So I remain uncertain. I saw something. It looked like two green orbs. They moved together at the height and spacing of human eyes. They illuminated the room strongly enough for shadows to shift. They traveled through a wall and disappeared. I was awake enough to observe all of that, or at least believed I was. I was not terrified. I was surprised. That is the complete truth as I remember it. People sometimes ask whether I felt any presence. I cannot say that I did. I did not feel watched before the lights appeared. I did not sense anger, sadness, or danger from them. There was no emotional message attached to the experience. Some ghost stories include a sudden cold feeling, pressure in the room, or the sense that someone is standing nearby. I remember none of that. The orbs were visual. Their light affected the room, but I did not feel a personality behind them. That makes the eye comparison even stranger. They looked positioned like eyes, but they did not clearly behave like something looking at me. Maybe that is why I stayed calm. If I had felt that an intelligent presence was watching me, the experience might have been much more frightening. Instead, the lights seemed neutral. They moved with purpose, but not necessarily awareness. I sometimes think about whether color can be connected to memory errors. Human night vision is limited. In darkness, the eyes do not see color as accurately as they do in daylight. Perhaps the lights were white or another color and appeared green because of the conditions. Maybe an electronic glow left a green afterimage in my vision. If I had looked at a screen or small light before turning toward the room, the afterimage could have formed two circles. But an afterimage usually moves with the eyes. These seem to remain in the room and pass behind or near objects. Again, the moving shadows make the experience harder to reduce to a simple eye effect. I have accepted that I may never know. Not every strange experience receives an explanation. Sometimes there is not enough information. The event is too short, the witness is alone, and no physical evidence remains. The honest response is not to declare it supernatural or dismiss it completely. It is to say that something happened which I could not identify. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it is more truthful than pretending certainty. Maybe I saw a ghost. Maybe I saw a rare trick of light. Maybe I experienced a vivid sleep-related hallucination. Maybe two different ordinary effects happened at once and created something extraordinary. I cannot choose one answer with confidence. What I can say is that the experience did not feel like a normal dream. I remember dreams that were much more dramatic but faded quickly after waking. This memory stayed simple and clear. The room, the green light, the two equal orbs, the moving shadows, the wall, the darkness. There is no complicated story to forget. Each detail supports the next. Even now, when I think about it, I can picture the lights moving at the level of a person's face. I can imagine the outline of someone between them, although no outline was visible. The mind wants to fill the empty space. It wants to give the eyes a head and the lights a source. That empty shape may be the most unsettling part. If I had seen a person, I could have reacted to a person. Instead, I saw only what might have been the eyes of something that had no visible body. Yet I was not afraid. I watched it pass. Then the wall swallowed the lights, and my bedroom returned to darkness as though nothing unusual had ever been there. I still do not know what I saw. I only know that for a few seconds, two green orbs floated silently through my room, perfectly matched in size, height, and distance from one another. They gave off enough light to move the shadows of real objects. Then they went directly through the wall and vanished. Maybe it was a ghost. Maybe it was something completely ordinary, seen under unusual conditions. Whatever it was, it remains one of the strangest things I have ever witnessed. The most surprising part is still my own reaction. I did not scream. I did not run. I did not hide. I simply watched, surprised, while two green lights that looked like human eyes crossed my bedroom and disappeared into solid darkness.